Welcome back to Speak and Serve, and today we're going to be focusing on relationships. How is your relationship today? And I've got an expert in the seat who's going to help us really finish this podcast with some tips on relationship success, in particular the art of communication, which is what this channel is all about. Welcome to the show, Poya.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's great to be here.
Well, first of all, can you just give us a little flavour of how you got to this point coaching on relationship mastery?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. It basically comes down to personal experience. So there was a time in my life, which is over a decade ago, where I struggled very much with my own relationships. Through a series of problems, I ended up in a situation where I almost lost it. So this isn't what I wanted at the time, and I couldn't find help from other sources. I decided to educate myself, and this is what started the journey to I ended up helping a few people on the way and made sure that their relationship and marriage is saved. 2 years ago I left the corporate world and decided that this is a meaningful career for me, and here I am.
And serving people on such a vital component. For the people that are listening now, what can you guarantee them by way of offer of benefits that is going to encourage them to continue to listen to our conversation for the next half hour or so?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, through this journey of educating myself, I realized how important a relationship actually is in terms of influence it has on the aspects of our life, so health, career, and other areas. And I also realized that we're very poorly equipped to enter such a huge commitment, which is the marriage or long-term relationship. And what I can offer today is some of the basics that allow us to be able to take a step back and have a look at where we are and why are we doing what we're doing, and why are we communicating the way we're communicating, which is might cause problems in the relationship. And if we can understand those better, it will have a positive impact on our relationship.
Very good. Let's talk about expectations then from the get-go, and let's just pretend that we're somebody that is on the verge of committing to a really serious relationship, perhaps engagement and marriage. And from their perspective, they're thinking that this is going to be the thing that's going to fix all of the problems they've got in life. They're going to get engaged, they're going to get married, mum and dad are going to be so proud of them. Is that the recipe for success for relationship mastery?
I like the way you put it. So we think this is going to solve our problem. So typically what we do is we enter a marriage or a long-term relationship. It's basically a massive commitment. And what we bring into this commitment is a whole set of history, a lot of baggage that we carry with us. So we basically paint a story, we tell a story about ourselves and also what we want this relationship to be like. And we enter it with a story. Now, this story has a whole set of expectations that we have already decided based on all those other events and the build up to the present moment that we carry into this relationship without communicating that with our partner. And the main reason we don't communicate that is because we ourselves might not be aware that we're carrying all this set of expectations with us. And this is what ends up us eventually turning those expectations that might not necessarily be met at some, the relationship, which then turns into resentment.
And what are the kind of big ticket items that people would not generally communicate, but they have an expectation about? I'm thinking children, location of work, how they work, how much money they want to acquire between them. Those are some of the big ticket items that would be formed expectations, but not necessarily communicated.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some of them. And interestingly enough, it changes from men and women. Obviously, women go in with a different set of expectation that might include how stable the relationship is going to be or what kind of income level we're going to have. And men might go in from an intimacy level expectation. Both sides might have expectation on how many children they want to have, whether they want to have children at all, where they're going to live, what is their lifestyle going to be like. It really varies from relationship to relationship, of course. It really depends on your past. But yes, some of the things that you mentioned are absolutely vital.
Fair enough. How are we going to have that conversation then without it becoming awkward or just a bit weird? Suddenly thinking about getting engaged, it's the most beautiful thing that could ever happen, and yet suddenly we put all this baggage on the table to say, yeah, but I just want to be clear about this, this and this, without it already becoming conflict orientated.
Exactly like you said. just put it on the table. And I think honesty is really the best solution. But before we do that, we really need to have a look at ourselves first and understand what is our expectation. So a lot of people don't know what their expectation is. So have a look, see what is it that you want to get out of a relationship. And this question of what it is that I want is in fact one of one of the first steps for me when I speak to my clients. And it's not an easy question to ask because a lot of the times we haven't allowed ourselves the permission to even ask that. But I would say this is the very first step. So when we look at ourselves and we can understand ourselves, then we can understand what do we want out of this long-term commitment. That is the first step. And the most crucial step is absolutely what you said, which is the communication. And the more open and honest we are about it, the better. Because you're going into this discussion or communication with a positive intention. You want to make sure that you also open up to your partner and that you're also asking your partner to open up to you. And if you start your relationship in such a great, honest step, it will definitely have positive repercussions going forward for the rest of your life.
Okay. I know we're going to get into the horrible aspect of arguments soon, but how do you frame that conversation then? So you want to have this open and transparent conversation. You just come in from work day and say, hey, I know we're going to get married. I just thought I'd put a few things on the table about my expectations. Is that the approach, or is there something a little bit more strategic and softer approach than that?
That's also a really good question. So what you don't want to do is come with a series of demands. That's not how you should go about it, of course. So you mentioned soft and strategic, absolutely. You want to go with the angle that you're doing this because this matters to you. Your relationship and the survival of this relationship, marriage, matters to you. So therefore, you want to take the open and honest approach. And you can say, I have these on my mind. I've thought about it. I have these on my mind. Let's discuss it. I would like to know what it is that you have in terms of expectation. What is on your mind? What do you think you would like to get out of this relationship? And that opens a conversation that allows both of you to search deep within yourself to understand what it is you want, you share it, and also you have to go in with an open ear and compassion and understanding so that when your partner also shares something that they have or an expectation they have, you're open to it, you listen to it and you take it in and you can discuss it between yourselves.
And for the benefit of people who follow my channel, let's just underpin why this matters, because I'm sure we all want to have thriving relationships, to be great speakers, to be great communicators. Could you help us understand the consequences of relationship breakup or just poor relationships in our lives?
Well, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, relationships play a huge part in how basically, I say the quality of our relationship very clearly defines the quality of our life. If our relationship is poor, the quality of our life can't be that much better. So it plays a huge part in our life quality. Trying to understand why a certain problem might happen, trying to make sense of it is to me the way to go about fixing it. And if you're talking about the consequences, of course, the consequences of divorce and separation, especially when children are involved, are things that you can't really put any monetary value. But there's, of course, the financial aspect. There is the health and mental and physical issues that you might suffer because of a breakup. And to me, the most important point when it comes to children are, of course, the impact that it could have on children.
Could you explain that a little bit more in terms of the impact of children? Is that something for the short term, or does it rest with them for a longer period of time?
It actually stays for them for life. So statistics show that children of divorced parents statistically are 50% more likely to get a divorce themselves. And that is basically because these are the dynamics that the children have seen in their childhood. So this is what they've absorbed and learned. So it's more likely for them to follow suit. And it's not always the case, of course, we're talking about statistics here. So it has an impact on an intergenerational level. It has an impact on every other, for the rest of their life, basically for humanity as a whole, if you want to put it in that sense. So if we want this chain to break, so to say, it does make a difference to see what can we teach our children so they themselves don't follow the same mistakes that possibly we did, or be that kink in the chain to make sure that whatever influenced you from your childhood, from what you've seen from your parents, isn't then reflected on your behavior and your children, so that they don't end up in a painful separation or a marriage breakup or a divorce.
Well, it seems like we need lots of people like you, because if it's going intergenerational, then it's it's almost like a tidal wave that's just going to get bigger and bigger as more children face into the prospects of divorced parents. Okay, let's just say I am now a potential client. We've met at a networking event or I've come across you on LinkedIn and I open up to you quite quickly to say, do you know what? I am having argument after argument after argument with my wife now of 8 years, 15 years, and it's just getting worse and worse. And I feel as though we were at the end of our tether. What's the first steps that you're going to take or you could recommend to somebody who's feeling that way today?
Sure. That's a very good question, Chris. Thank you. One is try to understand where you are. Now, people that come to me, I go through 3 phases with them. And the very first phase is the analysis phase. So when we first meet, if someone comes to me, I recommend just to have a conversation. And that conversation alone is extremely liberating because you end up noticing certain things that you might have never realized. Because typically we're on reaction mode. So we don't realize what is happening to us unless we take a break, take a pause and have a look at it. So that is the very first step. And what I do with that is try to make sense of our own behavior. Why do we speak a certain way? Why do we snap in a certain area? Why do we have resentment built in? And what is the cause of it? And I can go through the underlying cause of it. But basically, I go through this phase of understanding themselves and also understanding their partner, which then paints a picture of why the relationship is where it is. And then we go through the different phases of understanding what it is that we want. Where do we want the relationship to go in the future?
Okay, so that's phase 1. I'm curious, what happens? I'm thinking that's probably quite emotional, is it, when they unpack all of this thing that they've been harboring for however many years, suddenly it all comes out with some incisive questions from you. I imagine that's quite an emotional time, is it, in that phase?
Absolutely. It is extremely emotional, but also liberating at the same time. So in my opinion, the worst situation to be in is to suffer without realizing why, because then you can't really do anything about it. If you understand why something is the way it is, then that's the first step for you to try to mend it, to improve the situation. So that's why I have this analysis phase. So it's very much a discovery, a self-discovery journey. And also, you might realize that the reason your wife or your husband, your partner basically had said this thing or behaved a certain ways, you realize the underlying reason could actually be something very different. So I can go through these 3 basic needs that we all have, and every single argument or a difficult situation, if we peel the layers, we understand all of these arguments come down to one of these 3 needs not being met.
All right, I'm writing these down. Go for it, because I want to make sure that I don't go into the weekend with any of these 3 missing. Off you go.
Absolutely. So the first need is we want to feel close. We want to feel that we're cared for. We have a need for intimacy and trust. So that is the first need, that we want to feel close with our partner. The second need is that we want to feel valued. We want to feel that...
Sorry, when you say intimacy and trust, as in, is that from a sexual perspective of contact, or is it just a feeling of closeness, touching, being present with the person? How do you mean by intimacy and trust?
Okay, so I mean this as 2 different things. So we want to have trust and we need the intimacy. And the feeling of closeness is the combination of all of those. Now, every relationship is different, but in every relationship, the need for closeness is there. In some relationship, it doesn't need to be a physical intimacy. In some, it does need to be there. But the feeling of closeness 100% needs to be there. Does that make sense?
Intimacy and trust. That's number 2. I've written that one down.
Okay. Number 2 is that we want to feel valued. We want to feel that we matter. That we want to feel a certain level of respect and recognition from our partner. That our contribution towards the relationship is equal, is matched, and it matters to the relationship.
And number 3?
And number 3 is that we want to feel that we're being fairly treated. And that encompasses the feeling of that there is a balance in the relationship, that our priorities are equally matched from both sides, and that we both have a similar sense of entitlement of what goes on in the relationship. So just to briefly talk about them. So first one was feeling the need for feeling close. The second was the need for feeling valued. And the third was feeling the need for equality, fairness. And every single argument, I guarantee you, boils down to at least one of these needs not being met.
And
So
when that person comes to you in phase one, do you tend to find that it's the male or the female part of the relationship? Obviously, it could be two males as well. I'm not suggesting that, or two females, but as a general norm, what kind of person is the one that puts the hand up first to say, I feel I need to fix this?
Right. And that actually differs. It varies very much. So one of the things I'm doing actually, I'm running a case study since the beginning of this year where I allow men to be able to talk to me about the challenges they're facing in their relationship. So this is purely for men because men generally, a lot of people say, oh, men don't want to share feelings or don't want to talk. That's not the case at all. It's just that they need to have a safe place to do so. So I'm providing that. And through that case study, I've noticed that it's not always necessarily the men or the women that want to try to fix a relationship or go. It really varies. Men have a lot more solution-oriented mindset towards things, and women seem to have a more emotional approach to things. It really differs, but I don't think we can split it into a 50-50 or 60-40 percentage.
And after phase one then, and we've just tried to uncover the three human needs or however you want to phrase them, do you then leave them to think about that, or do you allow them to leave with some tools already to start to try to get to the surface of some of the issues then that are endemic in that relationship breakdown?
Yeah. So part of that phase one for me is not just so that we look at ourselves and relationship. It's basically a mapping out of our relationship. It's to understanding where we're at. And part of that is pattern recognition. So I ask people to take some time in their relationship and see if they can recognize patterns. For example, you can see, okay, when it comes to money, for example, we're quite good. We see eye to eye. But when it comes to the kids, we argue a lot. This is where we have a bit of a weakness. We have to work. When it comes to intimacy, we don't see eye to eye, and so on. If we have this pattern recognition combined with understanding what are the underlying reasons for our argument, then you're at a stage where you've done an analysis. Then you can move on to phase two. And I don't leave them alone to do that, but because this is a continuous journey. You give them a different perspective to look at their relationship. And when they have that, the next step is to really fill in the gaps. So when you see that there's a problem here, you want to know what you can do about it. And that's basically phase two.
Yeah, so from a perspective of phase one, when people are coming into relationships with expectations, is it fair that some people will come into a relationship with expectations that are given to them by others, which could be family, it could be culture, it could be societal beliefs that they have just come to think this is the way that we operate?
Absolutely, 100%. So we have a certain programming that we go through, especially in our childhood, that tells us what is okay and what isn't. So our expectation levels are all based on those set of learnings that we've had in our younger years. And so when we enter a relationship, we already have an idea, okay, even the very basic, okay, monogamy, that is an understanding, and that is something that might be societal related. Certain societies might not have it as important than others, or others more. But yes, absolutely, there's a set of expectations that is set, let's say, for us by society. So when we enter a relationship, we already have those programmings in us, and that plays a huge part in this expectation setting that we have from our partner.
And it could be that actually we're also thinking, we now need to get the house, get the kids, get the car, extend it, and go on a holiday because that's what everybody else on the street is doing. And when we can't meet that, that can cause conflict in relationship as well, I assume.
Absolutely. We're very much social beings, so we want to feel like we belong. So if we live in an area where everyone does a certain thing, we don't want to feel like we're the odd one out. Or at least it's an uncomfortable situation to be in if we are. It takes a lot to not care about that. But yes, absolutely. And then this is one of the steps that we talked about earlier, to actually communicate that with your partner, because it could be that you don't have those, but your partner does. And if there is a huge discrepancy in this expectation, then of course that's going to cause an issue.
Well, yes, you could imagine one of the partners goes to work and another one is with the kids and they're at the school gate, and there's this sort of pecking order of who's got the biggest car and who's got the best coat and which kids are going on the best holidays, and it becomes an echo chamber that one person has to live in and one person doesn't, because they might be at work and failing to communicate that, I would be an awful lot of silence that needs to be aired, I guess.
100%. And that is resentment waiting to happen.
So phase 2 then, we've just given them a few tools there to think about in phase 1. Tell us about what happens in phase 2 working with you.
Sure. So phase 2 is all about learnings and putting into action. So once you've mapped out your relationship, you understand a little bit better about where your weaknesses are, why you behaved a certain way, what are the needs that aren't being met. You can go into learning on how to do things differently. And one of the very powerful tools that I tell my clients is to have things from their own perspective. So when they communicate to our partner, don't go and say, you're such a messy person, you're so brutal, or you don't understand, or go and say how you feel about it. You can say, this thing that you did, whatever it is, made me feel this way. So you take it and you change the perspective, so you communicate from your own perspective rather than pointing fingers and starting saying, and so rather than having an accusation, you're basically sharing how you feel about it. And that's a very powerful thing. That is one step. And I go through the over 10 years of learnings that I've had, I channel it to their situation. Every relationship is different, and my work is very much personalized. So we understand different situations and how can we take each situation and do it better. So one of these different perspectives is one aspect, but also understand that if you are upset about a specific behavior from your partner, what is the underlying reason and how can you communicate that better with your partner and also from your partner to you. There's a number of other steps that get quite complicated, but that's basically the steps that I go through. And that includes then taking action. So you decide that you communicate better, you decide that you behave better, and you also listen better.
There's a phrase, it takes two to tango, though, and where do you approach it where one person is really invested in a positive outcome that is going to take some change and take some discussion, but they come back to you to say, I tried all those things you told me to do, but I've just got a wall of silence, and actually it's worse because now she's telling me or he's telling me that I can't even make my own decisions. I've got to come to a coach before I can live my own life.
Yes, that's a really good question. Yes, absolutely. In every situation, especially when it comes to relationships and issues in relationships, there is almost a split in terms of blame, if we want to call it that, blame. But even, and this is a very controversial topic, even when it comes to infidelity, you can't always 100% blame one side in terms of the cause for that. There is always elements that you need to have a look at to understand what happened that led to that behavior. And if you go back and understand this, sometimes you can actually turn it around into something positive. I've had situations where even in those situations, you can turn things around and have a better outcome, better marriage or relationship afterwards. If you really hit a dead end and a wall with every approach, and the one example that you mentioned, you can't even make decisions yourself. I think the approach is really that we have to understand that we typically, humans, all of us, enter these endeavors, these commitments like marriage, poorly equipped. So the best thing we can do is to equip ourselves with the right knowledge and the right tools. So there's no way anybody can accuse you of having to take on an activity that gives you these tools so that you can work on the relationship better in any negative way, because we need them, because we don't have them. So that can be turned around and shown that now I understand you better, I can understand my own behavior better, so we can work together better. And there's no way you can turn it around into a negative point of view.
I know that there's an awful lot of friction as people get into midlife changes, and I'm thinking perimenopause, menopause, and also from a male perspective, there's other things that can contribute, such as testosterone or even career change, loss of libido. And when you've got that primary driver there of intimacy and closeness, how do you try to enable a couple to move forward when one of those core needs either isn't available, can't be available, or just one person isn't in the mood?
Right. This is actually really important, the topic that you're touching on. Actually, statistically, divorces and separations happen in midlife than any other age. And there is a reason for that. And one of the things you mentioned, it could be menopause, it could be hormonal change. Basically, there is a situation change that wasn't there before. And when we enter a marriage or a relationship, we have these expectations. And at the beginning of the relationship or marriage, tolerance to these expectations not being met is higher. So it's okay, we give it some time, maybe it will work out in 5 years, 10 years. And then typically what happens is kids are born and then our focus changes, and the kids are then the glue that makes sure that both parents are there for the children, and that becomes our attention. When the kids grow, and especially when you have the issue of the empty nest, then especially if you couple in the other aspects like menopause where there's hormonal change, people tend to step back and realize, hang on a second, when I went into the marriage, I wanted this. And now they get a chance to look at it and think, well, they aren't met. The kids aren't there to take focus. They think, okay, well, we're probably different people. We don't want the same things anymore. Back to your question, there is always an underlying factor why you're together with someone. And that never changes. That was there from the beginning. So what I do is remind people what that rock is. And that helps a lot for you to understand, why are you even together? And sometimes a reminder of why you decided to go into a marriage or relationship, reminder of that makes people realize, oh, actually, these are the things we liked about each other. These are the things we used to do together. We don't do anymore. So if you see that rock and you see that that doesn't exist anymore, then of course, I'm not going to say you need to stick to your relationship no matter what. In certain situations, it's actually better to separate. But there is a statistic that shows that more than 40% of people actually regret having gone through a divorce after the dust has settled, because they think maybe there was something I could have done that I didn't do. And this is where I come in, just to make sure that you don't have that regret afterwards. If that underlying rock isn't there, absolutely. But if there is, then let's focus on it and see what we can do to move forward, both being on the same path, basically.
Well, when you talk about the impact on children and obviously financial as well, it seems like it's worth spending some time on if that 40% statistic is valid. So stage 3 then, we've gone through 1 and 2. What does breakthrough or transformation look like if that's actually stage 3?
Sure, that's basically it. So it's a transformation is a very good word. I call it foundation building. So what you do is the things that you've learned from your own behavior, the mapping and the pattern recognition that you've done in phase 1, and the learnings that you've gathered from, let's say, an expert like myself, you apply those to your life, and then you make them habit. You make them the norm. And you realize slowly, you've found the joy in the relationship again. And you realize that next time your wife shouts at you for whatever reason, if that might even happen, you think about, what is she actually upset about? And you've tried to fix that. It is about just having that awareness. And if that becomes a norm that you do it every time, you become a better listener, you become more present, both sides, and then you enjoy life together. And that is what you want to carry with you. Because even if you do want to separate, it's better to know that you've given it a try than to think, it's a shame that I didn't try harder, or it's a shame that I didn't attempt it. So you don't have that regret. If you've tried it and you know that, okay, it's not for us, we're going to go in different paths, you do it in a much less painful way if you're given a try already. If that makes sense.
Of course it does. I'm curious, from a positioning of effective questions and communication, how do you enable somebody to leave from phase 1 or phase 2 and allow those really positive, effective conversations to happen? Do you give them some statements or some phraseology, or do you just allow them to try it out with their own personality? What are your recommendations there?
So it very much depends on what we found out in phase 1. So the analysis phase teaches us what are the typical arguments? How does the conversation go? What are the dynamics that we should be aware of? And that basically teaches us to apply a certain method. So one of the things I mentioned is changing the perspective, what I call the power of the I, communicating from our own perspective rather than throwing, pointing a finger and having blame, let's say. That is a very powerful method. But that then can be applied in these situations. So if I know, for example, typically, I'm just making an example here. If typically the man comes home late and the woman's upset about that factor, how can we take this situation and talk about it? Is she really upset about it? And I talked about these fundamental needs, and that is normally the fact that she doesn't feel this closeness exists anymore. But what she actually says is, again, you prioritize your work, or again, we basically dismantle these attacks and accusations to understand what is the need. And then we try to make sure that this need is communicated other way around. So the husband then talks to the wife and says, okay, well, maybe we can do something about this. And that is how we go from phase 1 into phase 2. But it very much is a personalized approach. So every situation is different because every relationship is different.
I can see that really playing out. So if I was working and I've got a very demanding boss and I've had to stay late consistently, I'm coming home thinking, I don't want to be here, as in the company. I'm late and I haven't seen my kids. And then the other side, my partner is annoyed with me because I haven't communicated that I'm going to be late. He or she is having to stay at home and compromising perhaps their fitness class or something else that is priority. And we've got two people that are both disappointed and disgruntled, just going bang. And I can imagine it can. There's no blame attached to either side, but they're both coming at it from a sense of me, as opposed to how this is got to this position.
Yes, exactly. That is such a good example. So from the man's perspective, he feels, well, I'm going through this crap at my work. I'm going through this difficulty having to answer my boss. She doesn't even recognize me. He feels unappreciated. And he thinks he's putting so much into the relationship and she doesn't even see that. And from her perspective, I've spent all day doing whatever. I have had my work and he doesn't even ask how your work was, and he just comes home late and there's no communication. So it really is taking every situation and really understanding both perspectives and then bringing a level of communication so that it doesn't end with you just making assumptions and then acting out based on those assumptions, but rather opening up and say, actually, honey, I've had a really hard day at work. Can you just listen to what I have to say? There are so many ways to dismantle that and turn a difficult situation where there's no respect or understanding into something that is actually a shared problem that they can talk about.
Because it's that second value you talked about was value, wasn't it? If I've done all that work and I'm not feeling valued by my boss and my partner because I've come home unappreciated, but the person who's at home is feeling unvalued because they're having to compromise what's important to them, that's a primary core purpose there that has been compromised, and they blame the other person for that. But actually, both people are almost equally contributory to the value to each other.
Absolutely. And that's what I mean. So there's always an underlying factor. They're both putting in effort in the relationship because they want to make sure that it works. It's just that it's not perceived the same way from the other person. But yes, that is what we share. And you talked about how can we move forward, seeing that underlying rock that I call always, we always can lean against that rock because we know at the end of the day, we want to stay together. And this is why we entered a relationship in the first place. We want the same thing. And that's the same thing that has always been there. Let's remind ourselves of it and realize that we're both working for the same goal. And sometimes we forget that. We forget it, and then we just, again, like you said, have our own perspective and not understanding that the other person is also going through difficulty. So yes, having that rock and reminding ourselves that is crucial.
It must be really rewarding what you do. And with that in mind, could you describe a client journey without obviously naming names or even gender? Could you describe, we'll call him Fred, whether or not I've got a client called Fred, by the way, but could you describe what they came to you with and then how they left in a much healthier position?
Sure. So yes, the answer to your question is it's extremely rewarding. And the main reason is that when I went through this difficult phase of my life myself, I was desperate to find someone like myself now. So I try to be there for them just to make sure that they don't go through the same way as I did. So yes, it is rewarding. And let's say we take Fred. And Fred has entered this relationship poor equipped because they haven't had the, let's say, exposure to understanding a certain amount of behavior. So when we go through this analysis phase, I basically sit with Fred and I'll tell him, just go through your day and explain to me what happens. What happens in the morning, what happens when you're at work, and what happens in the evening. So I can better understand what is going through his life, really, in terms of his relationship. And then when that happens, that sharing already is quite meditative for Fred. So that already opens him up to want to do more, want to share more. Then we go through different specifics. So on the weekend, I argued about this with Susie, let's say, we're calling the wife Susie. I take that and I'll go through the needs and we dismantle this argument and find out what the issue could be. Without having to do anything, we go through a couple of weeks at least of just perceiving, just listening in. And then we turned it around, and then Fred says, okay, now I understand that she said that, but my actually is because this isn't happening, or is because I had said this before, or whatever. Once this happens, Fred already feels a bit more optimistic because he is understanding why something is happening a lot more than rather just suffering because of it. And that is already great. And typically, and you mentioned earlier that, if the wife comes and says you can't even make a decision, typically what actually happens is that the partner is quite happy that the man has gone on a coaching program, because she sees that this matters to him. He's doing something, he's putting effort in to do something. So that normally has a positive effect. But throughout our journey, it makes Fred change his behavior, change the way he sees things from her, and also the way he says things. He's able to listen more, and I then empower them with certain tools. For example, the way you address something can be different. The time, this is also extremely important. One thing that men have almost no clue about is the menstrual cycle and the effect that has on women. We men have none of that. We're just flat out, our emotions are pretty much the same throughout. Understanding how important women's emotions are and their ability to communicate on the menstrual cycle is extremely important. So if Fred knows, if I wait 1 week or 2 weeks and then bring up this topic to talk about with my wife, and that could have a much more positive effect, absolutely, it's important to know that. These are the tools that I'm talking about. If we're equipped with these tools, we can turn things around in a way that we've never thought possible. So we go through this analysis, and then I talk to Fred about this, and eventually I say the course with them. So the course is actually 3 months, and the last month is basically just making sure that we continue doing the same thing. And the results, I can tell you that I would say all my customers have been really, really happy. And some of them actually come and said, I can't believe what we've been missing out on. Our relationship could have been so much better, but we just didn't know what to do about it. So we didn't know how to solve relationship issues.
Just going back on the menstrual cycle then, can you give us some guidance then as to, is it day 1, day 30, day 15? What's the recommendation for when we should approach some fairly difficult conversations about relationship?
Well, I can tell you when to definitely avoid it, and that's
Okay.
before the period actually starts. I would say that is the time, that's a week, that men should typically be as passive as possible. Don't start an argument, don't start a discussion. If something comes from your wife, just take it on, cushion the blow, as to sort of say. Just be there, as passive as possible. But remember it, and maybe then bring it up at a later stage. If there's something that your wife said, normally they don't mean it in the same way. The week after the period has finished, that is the week that typically is the most constructive when it comes to creating a bond, creating a connection. I would say if you have something important to discuss with your wife, wait until that week, which is actually what's called, I think, a fertile week. That is the week that is the best time to be able to repair any damage that might have happened.
Full disclaimer, if anybody's listening and you try to do it post period and you do it in that week and it is a cataclysmic failure, we just try to offer you something, but it might not always work.
It's just the best, gives us the best chance for it to work.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate there's lots of hormonal impacts and lots of changes that as men we have absolutely no idea on, because as you say, we're kind of like a constant line and we're not attuned to all the impacts of the hormonal changes that will be experienced by a female in that period of menstrual cycle. So very, very well made, and a point much appreciated. Just in terms of this aspect of modern life and the grind and lots of expectations and we need to do this, we need to do that, are you optimistic or pessimistic about humanity as a full form as to where it's going with relationship?
Ooh, heavy question. I would like to say I'm very optimistic, because typically I'm very solution oriented. I'd love to see that every problem has a solution, and if we just try hard enough, we'll find it. So in that sense, if we approach it from that angle, the internet, there's a lot of advantages that we can have from sharing things that we might have typically in the past not had the opportunity to. That gives me a lot of optimism.
But I'm hearing more about sexless marriages, or people not getting married, or people having children much later just because of busyness of life, or waiting to find the perfect partner if there is ever a perfect partner. are we setting ourselves up for a fall just because of the way that we now live?
I would say we're not making it easier on ourselves. So we definitely made it harder because we seem to have risen the expectation level that we have. So clearly in the past there was a role that the male and the female played that isn't the case anymore. So we are at a bit of a loss to understand what is our role in a relationship, as a father or a mother in a marriage. I think there is some realignment that we need to do to understand what is going to make it work. And there's a lot of psychology that plays a part that we obviously not all of us need to understand the details of it so much. But we need to understand that if we both, there's a number of misconceptions about what is going to make a marriage work. First of all, what you said, if there is a perfect partner, there is no such thing. There is no perfect partner. There is no perfect marriage. Every marriage needs work. If we don't put the work, it's not going to work. So we have to put in the effort. We have to realize that we cannot go in with that expectation and expect if that isn't met, that's it, it's off. It's not working. It doesn't work that way. So that education needs to happen. We need to be less selfish about it. If we do that, there is a success story out there. There's marriages that would absolutely work with in busy lives, in hectic lives. It's just a matter of wanting it enough.
I do think there's a really valid point there that you're making, is that we're sometimes living out the expectation of our grandfathers or even our parents. And yet the way that society is leveled up in many different ways, the man, the woman have got different roles to play. And if we are trying to create a marriage based on what we've seen of the past, that's automatically not really transparent communication. So a point very well made. When we go into situations with friends, I know that this is kind of, oh, have you heard about Fred? Yeah, Fred and Sally. Oh, what's going on there? And there's almost this gossip and tittle tattle that happens because I've just opened up to somebody to say that my name's Fred, I'm not getting on too well with Sally, there's not much action in the bedroom, and I'm feeling, I haven't got intimacy, I don't feel valued, and I don't feel really great. Is that the best place to tell our mates that we're not happy?
I wouldn't say, it depends on the mate. It depends on how close we are with them. If there's going to be judgment involved, then I would say no. If it's going to create a gossip, again, I would say no. It needs to be constructive. It needs to be in a safe environment that you know that if you share, there's a level of understanding and not ridicule. Because if it's just going to be a topic that every other person is going to talk about it in the area, then obviously it's not going to serve a purpose. But yes, I really think we do need to create safe spaces so that men do talk about it with each other, just so that we understand that we're all in the same position. No relationship is void of difficulties or trouble or crisis. It just depends on what different crisis we're talking about. So yes, I think it is positive. It's just it needs to be done in the right environment.
And looking back at your 10-year-old self from where you are now to where you were 10 years ago, what would you now say to 10-year younger Poya about how he was feeling at that time when he wasn't really happy in life and also relationship? What kind of lessons would you be writing to him about?
Chris, I love that you asked this question because, as I said, I have a case study that I ask men about the challenges. And one of the questions is exactly what you asked me. So this is now turning around and I have to answer. I would tell myself to not be burdened with the pressures of expectations from society and parents. So in my opinion, a lot of times we live other people's lives, not our own. And it gives us a certain level of pressure without giving us the fulfillment of a purpose. We think this is what we're supposed to be doing, but it's not serving us. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to notice that early enough and then step back and have a journey of self-discovery to find out what it is that we actually really want, but not all of us.
Good. So were your parents or your society giving you quite a big expectation of what your relationship needed to be or should be?
So I was in a very toxic environment when it comes to work. I was working at an investment bank. Not that I want to say negative things about all investment bankers, but it was a very, very toxic environment. And I think there was also a set level of expectations of, supposed to get married, have children, and so on and so on, buy a house and get a dog and so on. I was, in a way, playing a role. It felt like it afterwards, that was dictated to me beforehand. So yes, answer to your question is yes. I'm not saying that all of those are bad. It's just that you need to realize if that is what you really want, not what society or your elders are expecting of you. But you have to really want it yourself. And if it's not, find what it really is and pursue that.
As we get older, there's part of me that says we seem to become more and more reliant on our partner because we do everything together. And my personal belief is that I need to have my life and my partner needs to have her life. And when we come together, we can talk about different experiences and different places and different environments. And it becomes a conversation in itself. What are your thoughts on joined at the hip and doing everything together, or allowing two roads to go alongside each other and every now and then sort of get on the roundabout and have a chat?
Right. I would say being joined at the head or hip, wherever, is extremely unhealthy because we're all individuals. If we embrace our individuality, what actually makes a relationship work the best is that we find someone that is interesting enough that is not us. And that's what makes them interesting. And most of the time we're most attracted to them when they are successful at doing what they do, whatever it is they do. If they're a painter or they're good at whatever it is that they do, they're a business or a musician, when they're in their place, when they're good at what they're doing, that's when we feel most attracted to them. And that's because they're different to us. So I don't think we need to necessarily always like the same things and do the same things. We just need to be able to feel like we're with a person that is interested in us as much as we're interested in them, because we're interesting enough to them as much as they're interesting enough to us. But we should not try to make them belong to us in a way, but just make sure that we're on a journey together and we're discovering something new all the time. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. I'm glad you're in alignment with my own beliefs on how I'm going to live my next 35, 40 years of long, healthy life. Just transferring our thoughts to communication, I'm a great believer of being really intentional about a speaking gig or something coming up and really thinking about it, preparing, visualizing and role playing almost how that's going to go. From a relationship perspective, should we approach our calendar and almost strategic moments of communication to create good success in relationships?
So you're talking about having goals and aspirations?
Well, no, I'm thinking more about do we sort of schedule in a Friday chit chat about
Oh, right.
where we are and how things are going and how you are, how I am, what's coming up next month that I should be aware of, and just building communication in as almost a calendar appointment that we are committed to.
Yes. No, that's actually a really good approach. So a lot of couples end up, whether they're because they're working from home or for whatever situation, they ended up always having a specific time of day that they spend together, whether it's breakfast or dinner. And that actually is a really good time to check in and just see how things are. And if there's anything that comes up, that is the best time. But if that doesn't happen, absolutely it's important to schedule it, because you need a way to make sure you don't get distant from each other. So you get updates from the other person, and also this checking in, make sure the other person feels that you're valued. This second number, the need that we have. And if we spend some time listening to our partner, just for them to go through what the week has been and what is coming ahead, it gives them the sense of, they matter to us. And that's so important. That's us being present to them. If that doesn't just happen because of our schedule, because of our timetable, we absolutely need to make sure that we do schedule it. Yes.
So having a nice bowl of porridge scrolling through Instagram while she's talking to me about the day ahead, recommended or not?
Not. No, we really need to be present. So put away the phone. Obviously, if you're having porridge together, then it's not. But you really need to be able to listen. The worst thing we can do is be at a breakfast and each of us are on a phone, or even worse, one person is talking and we're just on the phone. That's just the worst thing we could do.
I've really enjoyed the conversation today, and I'm sure you're going to leave us with 3 golden nuggets as to how we can live a long, healthy, joyful life. What would be your 3 takeaways from your perspective?
3 golden nuggets. I would say the first one I would have is don't judge. Don't judge others. Definitely don't judge yourself. It sounds easier than it actually is. But if you can manage to do that, you will liberate yourself from an enormous amount of stress and pain. So number 1 would be don't judge. Number two, I would say be curious. I think it's a lot nicer to understand why certain things are happening. It makes a lot more sense, and it also lifts a whole set of frustrations. Again, like I said earlier, the worst position to be in is to suffer because of something and not knowing why. But when you make sense of it, it's very nice. So I would recommend people to be more curious, just finding about things. And third, I would say value the power of your choice. I think choice is, in my opinion, our biggest gift, and we take it for granted. It's a lot more powerful than we realize it is if we decide, and that's what I always say to my clients, and as I say, that the very first step in this whole journey of getting your relationship to a level where you're actually happy is deciding, I'm going to do something about it. Once you make that decision, everything else follows. Actually, that decision, that point when you make the decision, is the most important factors in everything, whether it's a business or studying. So it is extremely powerful, and it has more power than we realize. We can decide not to let our past dictate our future. And I think it comes down to that choice. So again, value that wonderful gift that you have, which is your choice.
Well, I like those. I think they could be transferred across many different avenues. Don't judge, be curious, and make choices, or know that you have choices. Thank you. What would be the best way for somebody to get to work with you by way of websites or programs or systems?
I'm on LinkedIn as the platform of my choice. And so you can reach me on LinkedIn if you're there. If you're not there, you can reach me. You can go to my website. My website is literally just my name, so puyardelavar.com. Or you could just send me an email at puyar@puyardelavar.com. That would be the easiest choice.
Yeah, we'll put all those details obviously in the description somewhere down here. And do you only do online, or is it the person-to-person group? What's your methodology normally?
Sure. I do purely online, and everything is one-on-one, because I think it's important to have everything personalized. So I don't do group calls. Everything is online, one-on-one.
All right, we're just about to wrap up, but I'm always keen to make sure that I haven't left gold on the table. Is there something that I should have asked you that I haven't? And when you click off, you're going to go, I didn't talk about this. What would that be, if anything?
That is a very good question, Chris. I would say one very good question that comes up in a lot of very good conversation is, how do I de-stress? So obviously, most of our lives have a whole lot of level of stress that influences the way we think and make decisions and how we behave. If we're able to find that zone that we feel the most free, I think we should recognize it and value it. So with a lot of people who have children, they actually say, when I play with my kids, I'm completely free. There's no expectation of me. I can be whatever I want. So whatever that is for you, I think it's important to try to find it. And that plays a big part in any kind of self-discovery journey, just so that you have a bit of a zone, a personal, private zone that you can just be in without necessarily feeling the pressures from the outside. So you can just be. If you've managed to find that, I think it's important to do it. I would say this is one area that we might have not touched earlier.
And I guess that's part of your stage one discovery, is that you probably say, when do you find joy, or when are you just literally thinking of nothing else apart from that moment?
Yes, it is. But interesting enough, it always comes up anyways, because most of the people I work with, they are already extremely stressed because we're already in a crisis. So this is one method, let's say, one exercise that I recommend to them throughout this journey. So, but funnily enough, it always comes up, and we always find a meditation session where we focus on how can we just be without having to worry about the stresses. But yes, it really is.
Puya, thank you so much for your insights and your commitment. And one step at a time, you're going to solve all the relationships in the world, and we're going to have more people married, and we're going to have people living longer than ever due to the success of their relationships. And somewhere you are the causative factor for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for giving me the chance to talk about this.
That's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.